That was a very nice introduction. Thank you. For anyone who came in a little bit late, we have a small giveaway. So we have little cards that fit in your wallet that you can use to identify ticks that you might find on yourself or on your pets. There's some here and then there's some at the bar. So make sure you get one before you leave. Okay, so I study mosquitoes. My lab studies mosquitoes and mosquito-borne disease, but I'm going to talk tonight about ticks and about a disease that is commonly transmitted by ticks in Ohio, Lyme disease. And I decided to do that because I thought it would be a bit more relevant for this audience here tonight. All right, let's get started. So I'm Sarah Short in the entomology department. I'm also in the Infectious Diseases Institute at Ohio State. Thank you everyone for being here. All right, so let's talk about vector-borne disease transmission. That's the theme for the night. And in general terms, let's talk about what that means. So usually when we talk about vector-borne disease, we're talking about a pathogen that's transmitted by an arthropod, an insect or a tick. So if you have a tick that has a pathogen, can everybody see? All right. So here, pathogen inside this tick. If that tick comes across a vertebrate host, it wants to feed on it because it needs blood. So it might go feed on that host. And if it does that, it has the potential to transfer the pathogen to the vertebrate host. Then that host might get fed on again by another tick of the same species that needs a blood meal, but that tick, if you'll notice, doesn't have the pathogen. But if it feeds, it might pick up the pathogen from the vertebrate host, and so forth and so on, and the transmission cycle continues. And this is how vector-borne disease transmission happens. So we have vectors that are required, that are necessary to transmit the pathogen from vertebrate host to vertebrate host, etc. So if you leave here tonight knowing anything besides the fact that Lyme disease is getting worse and that you should know about Lyme disease, which we'll get to, I want you to try to wrap your brain around the amazing nature of vector-borne disease transmission. So the number of things that have to go right in order for a vector-borne disease transmission to happen is staggering. So even if we look at this incredibly oversimplified transmission cycle, which it is, most of them are not this simple, the pathogen has to do really well, has to survive, and has to thrive in both an arthropod vector and a vertebrate host. So those are two completely different ecological niches. It needs to propagate. In some cases, it needs to develop into like a completely different stage of its life cycle. It needs to get to the right place in the arthropod vector or in the vertebrate host in order to be transmitted. So it's amazing. It is a feat of evolution that these things happen at all. It's also very unfortunate for people and animals who get these diseases because they can be pretty nasty. So let's talk about one of these diseases. So today we'll talk about Lyme disease, and we'll talk about ticks, which are the vector that transmits Lyme disease. So has anybody heard of Lyme disease? Show of hands. Yeah, right? We've heard of it. Okay. So Lyme disease is caused by a bacteria in the genus Borrelia. This is what that bacteria looks like. It's long and skinny. It's a spiral shape. And it's vectored by ticks in the genus Ixodes, shown down here. So these are the adults, the nymph, and the larva. So we'll get to what that is in a second. But, all right. So Lyme disease is expanding, which is part of the reason I wanted to talk to you about it today. So Lyme disease is expanding, which is why I want to talk to you about it. It's not just expanding in general. It's expanding into Ohio very currently. So this is Lyme disease. Each of these blue dots is a report of Lyme disease in a person. This is from the CDC in 2001. And this is what it looks like in 2017. So you can see that it's been expanding westward, and it is knocking on Ohio's door right here. It's also expanding down from the upper Midwest. It hasn't reached Ohio yet, but it might from that direction too. So Lyme disease is here, and it's getting worse in Ohio. So what happens if you get Lyme disease? You get a lot of nasty symptoms, things like fever, chills, headache, muscle and joint pains. This is what happens at the beginning. If you get treated and the symptoms go away, that's great. If you have Lyme disease long term, the symptoms get much worse. They can become neurological. People can get extreme fatigue, extreme pain, brain fog, where they feel like they can't think clearly. It can be a really debilitating disease. One of the most common symptoms of Lyme disease, and the one that people probably know the best, is a bullseye rash. Has anybody heard of a bullseye rash for Lyme disease? Yeah. So it's a diagnostic signal or a diagnostic symptom. If you have it, then you can be diagnosed with Lyme disease. It looks like this. It doesn't always look like this, though. Sometimes it's just a solid circle, but it's expanding, usually. And the reason it expands is because the bacteria are actually infecting in the skin, and they are motile, so they can swim outward in a circular motion or a circular shape. So they swim away from the bite site, and that's what causes that expanding red rash. All right, so another thing I want you to take away from today is that Lyme is treatable. This might be a very well-informed audience, which is great, but I can't tell you how many people I talk to who think that there actually isn't treatment for Lyme disease. And many, many years ago, when I was much younger, I thought the same thing. I didn't know that there's treatment for Lyme disease. There is. It's not the end of the world if you get Lyme disease. However, even if you get treatment, there are a certain percentage of cases that still have symptoms after treatment. So, and those symptoms can be really nasty. So the best thing to do is to prevent getting Lyme disease. So Lyme disease should be a disease of prevention first, and then we can think about curing it later. All right, and we'll talk about how to prevent Lyme disease in a few minutes. All right, so let's talk about how Lyme is transmitted. So this is the most ecological part of the talk. So in order for vector-borne disease to happen, we need a vector. I already mentioned that that's Ixodes ticks. So on the eastern half of the United States, Ixodes scapularis is the species of tick that transmits Lyme disease. This is also known as the black-legged tick or the deer tick. And this is the female, and this is the male. And you can tell that this is a female because this little shield on her back only partially covers her back, whereas on the male, it completely covers his back. And that is you can see that on your tick card as well. All right, so if you have a vector-borne disease, you need a vector, but you also need a vertebrate host, right? In many cases, we call these reservoirs. So what's a reservoir host? A reservoir is an animal that can get infected by the pathogen. The pathogen can grow to really high numbers in the animal, but the animal stays relatively healthy, goes about its business, lives its life, but it's infected by this pathogen. And if it gets fed on by the arthropod vector, it is very capable of transmitting the pathogen to the arthropod vector. So for Lyme, the reservoirs are cute, fuzzy little rodents that run around our forests, especially white-footed mice. Very, very cute, but full of bacteria. These are the reservoirs for the bacteria. So they hold on to they basically culture the bacteria in nature. But what about people? We get Lyme disease too, right? We can get the bacteria, that's absolutely true. But we are what are called dead-end hosts. How lovely for us. What that means, it sounds terrible, but what it means is that we don't transmit the bacteria. So if a person has Lyme disease and then they get bit by a tick, the bacteria doesn't go to the tick. The tick does not become infected upon feeding on a person. And that's usually because either the pathogen doesn't grow to high enough numbers in the bloodstream of the host, or in the case of humans, it's a pretty short period of time that the bacteria is in our blood at all. So we just don't efficiently transmit. So we are not reservoirs for bacteria. Same thing for deer. So deer, you may have heard about deer and ticks and some relationship between deer and ticks. Deer do not transmit Lyme disease to ticks either, but they grow lots and lots of ticks because ticks feed on deer very, very readily, and deer often have many ticks on them. So deer are often considered reservoirs for the tick population. So they do play a role in Lyme transmission, but they don't transmit the bacteria to the tick. Okay? All right, so I'm in the entomology department. I like to talk about the arthropods. So let's talk about ticks. So ticks are arachnids, not insects. So that means they have how many legs? 8, right, like spiders. So other arachnids are spiders and scorpions. You can count as well. There are 8 legs here on all of these animals. So there's a tick. Okay, so ticks have 4 life stages, including eggs. So they start out as eggs, They hatch into larvae, teeny tiny little larvae. Larvae actually only have 6 legs, if we want to be careful or specific about it. But then they molt into nymphs, which are sort of like teenage ticks, and then they become adults. Adults are the only reproductive stage of the tick. So this is when mating occurs, and then the females lay eggs again. Every stage of the tick life cycle feeds on blood, except for eggs. But larvae, nymphs, and adults all need blood. It's the only thing they eat, they all blood feed. All right, ticks are tiny. Has anybody had a tick bite? Yeah, lots of people. There's ecologists, right? Yeah. So very small. Ticks are very, very small. Adults are about the size of a sesame seed. Nymphs are about the size of a poppy seed. So here are the nymphs. So this is Ixodes scapularis here. These are the adults and the nymphs. And then the larvae are about the size of a period at the end of a sentence on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper written in 12-point font. Very, very small. I don't know if anybody saw this on Twitter. The CDC tweeted this out a couple of years ago. Grossed out a bunch of people. So nymphs are the size of poppy seeds. So they threw a few of them onto a poppy seed muffin. And they said, find the nymphs. And the internet blew up for a couple days. But they are right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can see here, there's some legs on these poppy seeds. All the other poppy seeds are just poppy seeds. But that's how small they are. So the next time you get a muffin, think, this is what I need to be looking for after a hike. All right, this is the trickiest part of the talk, so you guys are going to have to work with me on this. But ticks are amazing little creatures. So the black-legged tick or the deer tick that transmits Lyme disease lives for 2 years in nature. It takes them 2 years to go from eggs to adult. So we're going to walk through their life cycle, and we're going to talk about where Lyme fits in to their life cycle. So they start as eggs in the spring. So we're starting right here. This is the beginning of our tick life cycle. They hatch into larvae, and they hang out in the summertime. They look for a host. They find a host. They latch on, maybe a little white-footed mouse, and they blood feed. Remember, every stage of these ticks have to blood feed. So when they blood feed for a couple days. They're very small. And then they drop off. Now, when a larva hatches from an egg, it is bacteria-free. It is squeaky clean. You don't have to be afraid of larvae as far as Lyme disease goes. But that larva might go blood feed on a mouse that carries the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. And then, and this is what's really critical, the bacteria is what we call transstadially transmitted, meaning that it's transmitted across developmental stages of the tick. So the larva molts into a nymph, and the nymph hangs out all winter with that bacteria inside it. So it carries it to the next developmental stage. And then that nymph, in the spring, comes out wherever it was hiding and goes out and looks for a host. That host might be a small rodent, it might be a deer, it might be one of us. And it is potentially infected with bacteria. It latches on, it takes a blood meal, and then it drops off. Then it molts into an adult, and then the adults that same year, so we're in like late summer, early fall for adults, and then they go out and they find a host, maybe a deer, maybe a person. If they're on deer, they can be lots of them. Males and females find each other on the host. They usually mate on the host. Then they drop off. The males usually die. The females crawl away somewhere and hang out until the spring, and then they lay hundreds or thousands of eggs in the spring, each female. So, and if the nymph has the bacteria, it will also carry over into the adult stage. So the adults are also capable of transmitting Lyme-causing bacteria. All right, quick question, poll for the audience. Nymphs of Ixodes scapularis, of that tick, are the most likely to transmit Lyme disease to humans. Any guesses why? Yeah. Because they're so small. So let's go back to this. Yep, exactly why. It's not necessarily because they're less likely to carry, or they're more likely to carry the bacteria. It's because we just usually don't see them. So that's why Lyme peaks during springtime. That's why people, you'll hear from public health professionals and things to look out for ticks in the spring. It's because that's when nymphs are most active, and nymphs are really hard to see. All right, so once a tick is out and looking for a host, it will engage in a behavior called questing. Adult ticks are most able to do this, so they climb to the top of a piece of grass or something, maybe the end of a tree, and they do this really cute little behavior that I will show you all right now. All right, so here we have a tick at the top of a blade of grass. So they have little hooks on the end of their legs, and they will use those to latch on to something fuzzy, like a deer or maybe a North Face fleece. So they get to the end of the grass, and then, oh, so cute. He's trying so hard. Like, come on, deer. Like, you almost want him to win until you remember, or her to win. So that's called questing. That's what ticks do when these ticks do when they're trying to find a host. So what happens once a tick finds a host? Once it finds a host, it feeds, right? So it does this by cutting the skin. Well, first of all, it crawls around until it finds a place that it really likes. So they look for somewhere that's warm and moist and dark. On people, it's often your shirt collar or in your hair, along your hairline, where your socks meet your legs or where your pant line meets your waist. And they'll nestle in there, and then they cut the skin and they insert their mouth parts. So the tick mouth parts collectively are shown here in this red box. They're called the capitulum. And if we zoom in, okay, so this is the capitulum from the top. So these are palps, these are sensory organs that the tick uses to smell you and taste you. And then their chelicera are right here, chelicerae, and they use these sort of scissor fashion to cut your skin. So they have little sharp blades on the end, basically, that they can slice your skin open with. And then they insert their hypostome, which is right here. This is the main feeding mouth part. So see all these backward-facing barbs? That really helps anchor the mouth part of the tick into our skin so they can stay in there, because they need to stay lodged in for quite a while. And then they do a few different things. And this is really, again, a testament to how amazing ticks are, if not very irritating. So they secrete a cement-like substance that anchors them into your skin. Has anybody removed a tick? I saw a lot of hands up for tick bites. It's not easy, right? Yeah. So they secrete a cement-like substance that really locks them in there. And then they begin to salivate, and they begin to suck blood. So they spit into you. Lovely. And their saliva is an amazing cocktail that has many different fascinating chemical properties. So they secrete in their saliva anticoagulants to stop the blood from clotting, because if it clots, then they can't finish their blood meal. They secrete anti-inflammatory compounds to reduce the immune response around the bite site so that the host doesn't find the tick and remove it, or like rub the tick off on a tree if you're a deer. They also in their saliva is where the bacteria comes out if they're infected with bacteria. So you get bacteria from a tick because it is spitting into you. And then at the same time, they're sucking blood from the capillary bed. And then they feed for many days. The adults can feed for up to a week. It takes them a long time to feed. And here's just a zoomed in version of that. So this is what a tick looks like inside. These are its salivary glands right here. They're huge. And then this is its gut. So its digestive tract. It has all of these little pockets because it needs to expand massively in order to incorporate the blood meal that it needs to take. So it takes about 24 hours, give or take, for Lyme disease causing bacteria to actually get spit into your body, although that number is a bit squishy. But generally, if you remove a tick before 24 hours, it serves to prevent Lyme disease. It definitely reduces the probability that you're going to get Lyme disease. The reason for that is because the bacteria actually has to move in the tick body to get into the saliva to get spit into your body, and that takes time. It's not instantaneous. So the fact that ticks feed for many days make them really good vectors because they're continuously spitting and they're continuously sucking your blood, and they might do so over a week. So they're really, really good vectors for the diseases that they spread. This is what a female tick looks like when she's unfed. This is an adult, and this is what she looks like when she's done. Compare the size difference. I mean, massive. And you can't see her from the side. I mean, she's almost round. There's so much blood in there. So This is part of the reason that it takes 7 days for them to feed, because the females actually have to build more exoskeleton on the outside of their body because they can't fit all of that blood inside them. So they need to build more exterior, basically, to hold it all, which is amazing. And then the female goes and lays, all of this blood goes into making hundreds or thousands of eggs that then turn into the next generation of ticks. Yeah, agreed. Okay, so I mentioned Lyme is invading Ohio, so I just want to show you a little bit of information on that, just in case you weren't sufficiently worried. So Lyme disease started increasing around 2012. It's been continuously increasing. 2019 was worse than 2018. So 300 cases were officially reported, but officially means diagnosis was absolutely complete and on the books and sent to the CDC, so multiply that number by probably 10, maybe more, is probably more accurate. Most of the cases are clustered in the eastern half of the state. And the question is, why? Why has Lyme disease expanding? Or at least one of the questions that people care a lot about, or scientists care a lot about. And one of the main reasons is because the ticks that spread Lyme disease have only recently invaded Ohio. So Ixodes scapularis has not been here forever. This is a study from 2014. Where they looked at ticks. This was from the Ohio Department of Health. Well, people from the Ohio Department of Health did the study, and they looked at the number of ticks over many years, or multiple years, and they found, 200 Ixodes scapularis up from 50 in 2010. It jumped up to 200 in 2011. In 2019, I just went back and looked at their current records. They reported 1,259. Now, their sampling may have changed from the time they did this study until their current sampling methods. I'm not sure because they didn't include all of that data together. But the ticks are here. They're reproducing, they're here, and they're not going anywhere. So this is why we have Lyme right now in Ohio. Now, why are the ticks here is a good question that we don't know the answer to yet. There are a lot of people that are working on studying that, but we don't know yet. All right, let's talk about how to protect yourself from ticks. So, preventing tick bites, number one step. The thing to do is to cover your tracks, which is an acronym I made up today, so feedback welcome. All right, so what you need to do, treat your clothing with insecticides. This is by far the most effective personal protection. You can get permethrin-treated clothing at the store, or you can do it yourself by following directions online. Use repellent. DEET is usually the recommended repellent, but it is not sufficient on its own. Insecticide-treated clothing is really much more effective. All right, avoid wooded and bushy areas with high grass, or run or walk in the middle of the trail. Try to avoid questing ticks. Questing, which is a word we all know now. Check your body for ticks after spending time outdoors. So check all those places where ticks like to latch on, like where all of your clothes meets your skin. Check your hairline, and then shower within a couple hours, and that's to get rid of the tiny little nymphs that you might not be able to see. All right, if you do get a tick bite, remove the tick as soon as possible. Grasp it with clean, pointy tweezers as close to the skin as you can. Pull straight up, don't twist. Do not put Vaseline on the tick. Don't burn the tick. Don't put salt on the tick. None of those are effective or necessary. And then clean the bite site with soap and water or rubbing alcohol. And that's to get rid of the bacteria that might be there. All right. If you're concerned about an infection, there are a lot of resources that you can utilize as just a regular everyday person. On the back of your tick card, there's a URL at the bottom. It redirects you to the bite site at OSU that has all of these links on it if you're interested and you want to know more. You can submit a picture of your tick to Tick Spotters, which is run out of Rhode Island. It's a great little organization, and they will help you identify the tick. You can actually go to Franklin County Public Health and hand them your tick with a form, and it has to be in a hard-sided container in rubbing alcohol, but they will take it and they will identify it for you. But I don't know if you get the tick back. So if you want to send a tick that you're concerned about for testing, you can do so at tickreport.com. It's $50, but they send you back a report of everything that was in that tick. So you can know whether or not it was infected with something. Don't smush ticks. Assume that ticks have bacteria in them. They're not safe. But, people don't always think about that. So, and then wash your hands if you touch them. If you have any other questions, this is a website at Ohio State that has information, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks for listening. you.